guys too that when we're drawing them, we're going to try to break it down into simple shapes as well. Right? That's always going to be something that we aim for. How can we break these shapes down and make it a little more simple for ourselves, even though we know underneath it gets a lot more complicated like we're about to talk about. So, if this works with me, there we go. So let's talk about the rib cage for a second. Okay, this is going to be our main structure of our building that is our body, right? It kind of keeps our organs safe. It keeps everything inside of us. But I also want to talk about too is when we're thinking about form, you know, the ribs are a cage, right? They're a structure. So we want to think about drawing the body like we would a building or something like that, where it is a 3D shape. It exists in space. It has thickness to it. It's holding stuff inside of it. It's not just like a 2D flat object, which is why I wanted to show this, right? It's a pretty complicated shape. We don't need to draw this exactly, but I do just want us to be able to look at this and see that it kind of resembles a little bit of like an egg shape, if you guys can see that. So like if you were to break this down again into like the simple shapes of what it is, we have like an egg that just has like the bottom carved out of it, right? And then we do want to remember that there is a hole at the top, so that way things can actually go inside and through, right? It's a cage. So moving on, if we look at the back of our ribs, one of the reasons, like, so if we're not going to get too confused about that egg shape, one of the reasons we don't look like an egg shape, right, is because our arms are attached to our shoulder blades and our clavicle, right? So these stick out externally from the ribs and they go out to the side where they connect to the arms, and this is what gives our arms and our shoulders that like rolling mobility and motion. So this is kind of like, it's important to know because this is why our shoulders stick out from our torso, because we can't have our arms just stuck onto our rib cage, right? They have to be suspended out. So that way we have free range of motion, and this is what gives us free range of motion, and is also going to give us that like tapered look as we go down the body. So going in, the reason I wanted to talk about skeletal structure mainly, and I hope you guys are sticking with me because I know this is a lot of information, but I promise we're going to get to the drawing stuff soon. But the main differences that come from male and female generally lie in the pelvis region. This is where the most biological differences are, and that simply being just the fact that the male pelvis is more narrow and the female pelvis is more wide, right? And there's the biological reasons for stuff like that, but just looking at this as a structure, this is why on a male figure you're going to get that wide shoulder and then narrow hips, and then on a female figure you're going to get that hourglass figure where the shoulders taper in but then they come back out and create like a rounder, wider hip appearance, because literally the structure inside is wider, right? So a few things that we can note here too that actually do affect the appearance is the sacrum, or the tailbone, right? On the male, it's actually longer. On the female, it's wider, but it's shorter. Okay, I'll show you a side view in a second here, but it also sticks out further where the male tailbone kind of tucks in more. Another thing too you might notice is that this area here is more narrow as well, and then we get a wider triangle right here. These are all things that like make slight differences but pretty important distinctions. So to show you guys a side view, so you guys can kind of see you have the wider, more narrow. It's the male's pelvis area is going to be also more straight up and down, where the female's is going to be more on an angle like that. And again, like I was saying, like this tucks in more, the tailbone area, where this actually sticks out more over here on the female region. which is kind of like what is going to give like a more flat appearance in the back and a more rounder appearance on the female structure, right, from the side. So this is kind of like what makes the main differences. Obviously there could be like some anatomical differences, and then of course people all look different, right? So everyone has their own individual bone structure and everything like that. So, but these are just kind of be like the big picture, right? The proportions. So trying to like not let that overcomplicate you, overwhelm you. The shapes that we're going to be thinking about when we're drawing are going to be pretty simple, right? So like if we're looking at this one over here, this is going to be our male, and then so we're just thinking wider in the shoulders. It's going to taper in, and then it doesn't really come out too far again, so that the hip doesn't really come out to the side or create any kind of curve, because the pelvic region, again, as I just showed you guys, is a little more narrow. And on a male figure too, the shoulders tend to be a little wider. So it also kind of helps with that exaggeration of showing form, that we keep the proportions in that kind of mindset where we think, okay, in order to make this really look like a male, if I'm like, my goal right now is just to make something that looks like a male specifically, I just want wider shoulders, narrower hips, right? You can even try to go a little more square and straight edged with the angles, right? And then, of course, the shape that we're looking at for the female is kind of that classic, like curved or hourglass or pear shape or whatever you want to call it. And again, this is because the shoulder is less wide, and then the hips come out just wider in general. So that's why it tapers in where the rib cage would be, right? But then because the hips they play that wider role, that's why the skin kind of comes back out, and we have that form. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. This is like in general what I want you guys to be thinking shape-wise when you're drawing, and then you guys can kind of already see like both of these shapes kind of already have like maybe like a more male and like female appearance, right? And in the classical, like just drawing like average body kind of shapes, right? So now we can get to the fun stuff. My talking explanation is over. We can start drawing now. So if you guys want to draw along with me, we just need paper and pencil today, maybe an eraser. And we're going to try to tackle and make it as simple as possible. We're going to try to tackle front, back, and side view of the male and female. So I don't want to spend too much time going into really strict muscular details and stuff like that, because I want to make sure that we have time to get through everything so you guys can get a pretty solid idea of what we're working on. Just want to choose a little bit of a darker color here. Probably stick with my red. I think it's going to show best on the blue. And so what we're going to do for this, if you guys showed up for the head drawing one, it's always going to go back to proportions. And one of the things we do in figure drawing a lot is we actually use the head as the guide of measurements. So what we have in the torso section is actually, it's about 3 heads tall. Now if that doesn't make sense, when I say 3 heads tall, what I mean is if I were to come in here and draw myself a circle, right? I'm going to keep this pretty short because I'm working on like a more landscape mode. You can draw, if you have a nice long piece of paper, you can go bigger. But for the sake of this example, I'm going to call this my head. Okay? And so what I want to look at with this is that this is going to be the height of my head. This is going to be the bottom. And using my finger, I'm going to put my thumb and my index finger to the top and bottom, and I'm just going to take that down, and we're going to create shapes, or we're going to create or a little bit of guidelines for ourselves, right? Bring it down. I think that first one might have got a little wide for me. But I'll keep it there. Okay. Let me just maybe scoot this head up a little bit for you guys. There we go. Okay. So we're not going to go into head details and stuff, right? Because we already covered that. Drawing full body is something that we can go over another time too. But now we're tackling what to do with these measurements we just got. So we should have 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, one of those being the head. And so what these proportions are telling me is where I can lay things out for later, right? So like this is going to be a front-facing view of my body. So I know that this line right here, let me choose a little bit of a darker pen, is going to be chest. What's the right? Whoa. That was weird. Alright, let me rewrite that. Chest. I know this line right here is going to be the belly button area, right? So like almost bottom of the stomach. And then this one right here is going to be the bottom of the pelvic region, right? So we'll say pelvic area. Okay, so again, these are just guidelines. These just kind of help you have those landmarks in place in your mind, so that way things don't get kind of out of control. We don't draw a chest that's too short and comes up too high to the chin, or we don't draw a belly button that's way too low, or the torso gets too long, and then we only have a little bit of room left for our legs in our picture, right? We want to try to keep everything in proportion, looking like as clean and neat as we can, at least with realistic drawing. Of course, with cartoony, we can go wherever we want. But that being said, so now we have our head structure in here, and I know that this is my chest. More specifically, this is like, it's going right through what would be called like the nipple line, right? So I know that in between here and here, I need to fit my neck all the way down to my chest in here, right? So we can kind of go ahead and maybe just like roughly draw this in. Remember thinking about those shapes that I showed you guys before, where I'm just going to kind of keep this simple, and I'm just going to taper it down. I'm not going to be drawing into the shoulders just yet. And I'm just going to taper this down, thinking about that shape that I initially drew, where it has wider shoulders or wider top part, right? And then it's going to taper in. And so if I were to fill in this area, right, I know that in here somewhere I have to have my clavicle shape, so you can kind of draw that as like a nice wide V. And then coming down would be the chest, right? Or like you can call them like the pectorals on a male, right? It would look different on a female, but this area can stay flatter typically. Cool. So now we have that area, right? And we know that within here is the nipple line, and we can keep moving down. Okay, so I know my next line is the belly button. So what I'm fitting in between here now is everything below my chest, right? So my rib cage finishes in this section, and then my hips begin in this section. They just start to begin, right? So we're still going to take that shape and we're still going to taper it in, right? Because the hips haven't actually come into play yet. And even though this is a male structure, and I was saying that the hips don't come out so wide, they still comes out a little bit, right? If you remember that shape, they kind of just come out a little bit on that angle. So just keeping it straight and narrow for now though. We're bringing it down. If you were going to try to figure out some of your rib cage structure, you can bring that into. You know, it's going to float right underneath the chest and kind of hover through that section. We want to remember it's that egg shape, right? So we have that internal part, and then it connects off to here, right? And then we know if we brought down like a center line, this would be where you might see like abdominals or something if we're looking at someone who's like very lean or fit. And then right here we have that belly button coming in. So from here what we're going to do is bring the pelvis out just a little bit. And so you can kind of have this shape come out, this shape come out only slightly, right? And then you're just going to bring it down and down. And we know that this is the bottom of the pelvic region. So I'm just going to kind of square that off a little bit. Maybe like a skirt kind of looking thing, just because, remember, these are just our structure, right? It's just our groundwork. So I can always come in here and change things. One thing you guys might notice in like a pelvic region is like you kind of have what would be like a V shape where the abdominals kind of come in and then they create that bottom abdominal shape, and that's kind of created by the abdomen tucking in and going to the bottom of our pelvic floor and attaching into there. So this would just kind of be a shape that comes in and creates like this. It would hover right above that bottom of the pelvic region, like so. Okay. And we're just going to kind of draw that in because that's going to help us also figure out where our legs are generated from. Because we know that we have to have our pelvis here and here. And our legs are pretty much going to start just right above that pelvic floor that we were talking about, that bottom pelvic area. So you're just going to create like another little bump that comes out. And obviously I don't have too much room to draw legs here. And then that would come down from there, right? But we're thinking about our hip structure being within this light box that I'm drawing. Okay. Alright. And then like looking at this, I can probably make this guy's head a little bigger. I feel like his torso got a little long. Okay, so then this is in general going to be our male shape. If we were going to add on some shoulders, you know, they would just stick off to the side here. Right? They come off of the clavicle area, because remember this is where the arm attaches in. And then it would go off to the side, but we're not going to get too into the arms and stuff today, because that would be a whole nother can of worms. But again, this creates that wider shoulder structure and then narrower hip structure, right? So erase some of this stuff so now we have room. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to carry over these lines that I drew so that way I can use them in the same proportions with my other views, my side view and my back view, right? So if you guys want to get really accurate with it, you can grab a ruler and bring it over. You don't need to, but I'm going to do this just so I make sure that I have consistency here. Okay, so I'm just going to bring a line across. If you guys have ever seen like maybe a character turn around or something like that in a cartoon, this would be similar to what they're doing, right? So I want my drawing to be about the same proportions each time. So this is how I'm gonna trick it so it becomes the same proportions each time. Okay, we're gonna go across. And Q-Loo. Why does this ruler just keep moving? Okay, give me a second, guys. This program is not being my friend. There we go. Okay, across. And then right here, cross. Let's turn this guy off. Okay, so I have my proportions. They might not be perfect, that's okay. You guys can always kind of look back at your drawing and decide to exaggerate things too. Because remember, everyone has different body types and stuff. So some people will have longer chests, longer torsos, shorter abdomens. It all just kind of depends. So let's go ahead and jump into the back view. So we did a front view, right? So let's see what this guy looks like from the back. So again, we're going to start with that head, and I'm just going to give myself an oval. Again, just kind of fitting it into that structure. And now we already kind of have things figured out, right? I know where my chest line is, I know where my navel or my belly button is, and I know where my pelvic floor is, right? So from here, I can just kind of copy that structure. I know that in the back, you're going to see a little bit more of the neck inserting into the skull, right? Because the vertebrae comes up pretty high. So we can kind of draw that into and work on that triangular shape again. Try to compare and contrast between your last one and make sure that they're about the same width. Looks like my guys are going to kind of overlap here a little bit, but that's okay because I want to make sure I have room to show you guys the side view too. And then I'm just going to continue that shape down, knowing the simple shape that I'm trying to use, and then we can come back in and kind of flesh it out and detail it a little bit, right? So I know I want that shape. I know it looks like it's going to come out a little bit wider here, and then go down. And then I remember I made that that bottom of like a skirt shape right there. Okay, nice loose, keep it light, because now we can come in and figure this out. So from the back, what we're definitely going to see more of is that spine, right? So you can definitely give yourself that center line going down. Okay. The way that the back's going to break down in proportions is that this line is going to be where you're going to see your shoulder blade. Right, come in here. We'll just kind of draw that as like a check mark for now. Little Nike logo on the back. And then you're going to have the top of the pelvis area here, which is where it came out on that front shape. Remember, so it came out from there. So this is where this line is creating, right? Because we don't have too many landmarks that we're looking at for the back side, right? All we have in the back is kind of like muscle structure. But what we can look at too is if we know where the top of our pelvis area is here, I know that my tailbone is going to have a lower appearance. So I can kind of give myself that tailbone as a triangle. And I know from the bottom of that, that's where the glutes are going to start, right? So, and the butt is going to be just below that pelvic region line here. And again, remember in male anatomy, the pelvis area, the tailbone is more tucked in, so it just kind of has a flatter appearance naturally. And then of course we can kind of come in and look at our other structure and give ourselves the leg. Right. If you want, the most predominant part of the spine that you'll see, or where the back kind of indents, will be right there above the tailbone. And then there's other muscle structures that are going on through here, but I think let's just kind of keep it here for now and not overcomplicate that, right? Because again, we can always go back in and re-explore anatomy, but I don't want to start leaping too far, right? We want to kind of keep this simple. How can we show male and female form in a simple sense, right? So going to the side view. So the side view is going to be a little bit different, right? Because we're not looking at such like a flat structure. This is where things curve around, right? We're usually more narrow from the side view than we are from the front view. So we have to think about things, and usually in body proportions, what we're thinking about is, let me go ahead and give myself my head first. So you can draw this as an oval if you want. I'm going to kind of draw it as um, like a side view shape here, where I give myself the front of the face and I give myself the back of the skull. Just because for me this is going to help me to kind of draw on that neck structure. But you guys can also just keep it as an oval if that's been helping you. So anyways, in body proportions, there's always going to be a straight side and a curved side, and this is the body kind of balancing itself out. So what I mean by that is the back, if you ever look at someone's back, it curves in. If they're standing from the side, it curves in and comes back out. It creates what's called like an S curve. So it comes out, it's going to curve in, right? And then it's going to come back out. I'm kind of exaggerating this a little bit just to kind of really bring home this point like that. And then so what's going to happen on the front is the chest is going to come out a little bit further than the face, and of course we have to make sure that our chest meets that line, because remember that's our chest line. But then this side is just going to have more of like a straight down look to it, right? It's going to taper in a little bit, and it's going to come down like so. So again, this is like, it's the S curve, which is here, right? And then this is kind of like that straight counterbalance, right? This is kind of like what helps us keep our posture up, and it also helps us balance as humans too. This is just kind of like the proportions that the body created to help us naturally stand, right? In here, we can actually go in and add a little bit more of a neck for this guy, and then lower that chest just a little bit. Here too, though, we can kind of break this down a little bit more. These were the simple shapes, right? So let's go ahead in and we can kind of flesh out the chest a little more. You do still see some of the side of the chest, but for the most part, you're gonna have like the shoulder coming in and the arm that would be covering a lot of this, right? Depending on where they're holding their arm to, their arm might be covering more of their backside, could be covering more of their front side. And then if we just remember our structures, right? I know there's a rib cage under here, right? And that's what's creating this nice round shape. And then, you know, everyone has like your stomach area is where like you're gonna have like the most amount of flesh with the least amount of structure. So usually it's gonna come in and then it's gonna come back out and then tuck back in. That just kind of creates that abdominal region look. And then coming up through here is where our pelvis would come in to play. You could see the top of the pelvis right here if someone was really, really lean or muscular, right? And then that's what would create the glute shape here as well. And then of course the legs generate underneath there, like so. Okay, so this would be our front, back, and side for male figure. We're going to jump to the female figure now. I'm going to give you guys like just a few seconds to kind of digest this. I know I just went through that really quick. This is something that just takes a lot of practice too. That's why I'm trying to like kind of break it down into simple shapes as well, so you guys can kind of see the exaggerated shaped thought process of it, as well as kind of understand that there is a little bit of structure going on here too. So give you guys just a second to take that in. All right, and then I'm gonna take the male figure off of here, but I'm gonna leave my line structure, which has all these lines on it for some reason. And so we're gonna use this now for the female figure as well. The basic breakdown of the proportions when we're using that head size again, pretty much the same. You're gonna have obviously the head being that first box, and then it's going to go down to the chest, and it's going to cross through that nipple line, and then the chest, it goes a little bit lower than in the male anatomy. The next line is still going to hit about that belly button area. And then the last line is going to be a little bit higher than where it was on like the male figure, because the pelvic floor is going to be a little bit higher and more tucked in for the female form. Right, so let's kind of just start the same way we did with our male figure, where we're going to go with that front form. And I'm just going to start with the head, so I'm going to give myself that oval shape. Right. Okay. I'm not going to try to figure out her face too much, because again, we're just trying to understand that torso. I'm going to go ahead and give her a bit of that neck, so I know where to generate her shoulders from. And from here, we want to remember that shape, right? So like if I bring this shape back up, that shape on the right, we want to remember that kind of taper and then wider look. So if we come back in, I'm going to bring my shoulders out, but I'm not going to bring them out as far as I probably brought the males, right? We're going to come in. So if I know that that's that line down here, where I'm lightly circling down there, if I know that's where the belly button's going to be, then I know that that's about where the rib cage is going to come in, and then just above that line is where the hips are going to come back out, right? So we can create that structure. So they're going to come in and in. And you guys might have seen like a lot of different artists, like Disney stuff, where they really, this is where they start to really exaggerate the form. This is where the rib cage comes in and creates like super narrow waist, and then comes back out and creates that really curvy Disney princess shape. These are things that, you know, like all form, male and female, is up for a lot of exaggeration, right? So you can have a lot of fun with it. But it's always going to come down to knowing your groundworks, right? Knowing that structure underneath. So from here, we're going to come back out with that shape. And if we're not going for anything that's like exaggerated or unrealistic, you don't want it to come out too much farther than you're probably going to make your shoulders, right? So if I know my shoulders are going to stick off somewhere around here, I don't want my hips coming out too much further than that. And then from here, the shape's going to come down, and you can kind of create that leg structure too. And now we just have like that shell of a shape. Okay, and we can start to fill this in. So again, we know that this this line right here is going to be our chest line. And so obviously females and males have a different variation in the chest, right? So females have breasts going on, so this is a structure that sticks out from the form, and so it's a little bit different in terms of like the length of the chest and what we're going for in shape, right? So let's go ahead first and find that clavicle area where we know this is going to come out and out, right, to help us create and find where our shoulders would go. We can come down with a bit of a center line here if we need to make sure that we're keeping our proportions even. And then again, so like if I were to come in and just kind of give myself my guidelines, I'd probably like place an indication of where I would want like the nipple to go, right? And then from here I can build the breast structure around it, which is going to connect to the shoulder. It's going to come out from the form and then come back in and under. Let's make that a little rounder. And then connect back to the chest plate, right, or the rib cage. So you want to be thinking of it just like in that terms of it is just like a form that is sticking out off of the rib cage. So you kind of want to think about like what kind of form would that be. This is just kind of like going into the basics of it, right? Okay, so we have what would be like the basics to female chest, and then from here you can kind of like decide rib cage shape. Usually the opening is just gonna sit right underneath the breast structure right there, and it comes in through here. And you can kind of really see that on female structure because that's where the hips start to taper and then get wider again. So it's like a really clear indication or like a landmark of where the rib cage ends, which is pretty cool. And then through here, we know that this is going to be the area where we see the belly button. The belly button usually a little bit lower than the belly button line would suggest for the male figure. And then within here, we're going to have the bottom of the abdomen. Okay, and then like I said, like the bottom of the pubic region right here. And then that's where the legs would also generate from. Right in there. Okay. And so again, this is just general shapes, right, and stuff like that. Everyone's body looks different, different proportions. But this is just kind of like breaking it down into like what would be like some basics that we could build off of when we're creating a structure. And then of course that most important part that we're looking for when we're creating male versus female is we're just really looking for that in then out hip structure. Okay, so like let's take it to the back now. And again, we don't have that many landmarks going on in the back, so we kind of have to trust what's going on, knowing that we know the front side. Okay, so I'm going to create my oval shape for the head. I know that, you know, the neck is going to come up a little higher here. We're seeing where it connects to the skull. And then we're going to create that shoulder shape. Again, trying not to get too wide with it. Okay. And then I can just look over to my other one too, especially since we have that drawing, to kind of let me know where things are coming in and tapering out. I'm going to give myself that spine structure like we did with the male. And I'm just going to bring a line down. Okay. And then let's go ahead and create the rib cage area. So remember, it tapers in. And I'm just looking over here. So I'm kind of like comparing where I had that taper in first. Tapers in. Okay. And then I know from my other structure, this is where the curve came back out, right? So I want to create that same shape throughout here. And then I'm looking also to kind of see like how wide did I make it go from the shoulders. I kept it about the same size as the shoulders. Right, so I like to work both sides instead of just committing to one side and then going to the other. So then this is where you're going to have that curved shape, and then it comes back down like that, right? Keeping that form nice and simple. Through here, we still have all the same skeletal anatomy structures going on, right? So we have our scapula back here, our shoulder blades, right? You can see the spine shape going down. We're going to have that tailbone. Then remember, it's going to be a little bit wider. So if you could actually, if someone was lean enough that you could see where their tailbone was being generated on a female structure, it would be wider than we drew it on the male structure, right? And then the reason we're finding this too is because this just kind of helps us find where the glutes are going to start. And then the glutes are going to fall right here on that line that I already drew that kind of matches up with the spine. And then you're going to have a little more of a rounder appearance on the bottom, because remember that tailbone tucks out further and it kind of creates that more of an arched shape just naturally. Okay, so bear with me guys, I know this is a lot. We're going to do one more. We're going to do that side view, and then we can jump in on a Zoom meeting and you guys can tell me what you're struggling with or anything like that, okay? So we're going to go for that side view now. So I'm going to look into drawing the face first, and again, I like to, when I'm drawing a side face, I like to go for that structure of like the flatter front with a more rounder backside to kind of create a skull shape, right? And then this is what helps me find that neck structure coming out and coming out through here. Cool. So from here, we have the same things going on. Before we get into things like drawing the breast or anything like that, we're going to think about the same way that we just drew the male, where the back has that S curve, right, where it comes out and then in and then back out, and then the front is more straight. The proportions are still there because you think that just looking beyond what's on the outside, you still have just the rib cage and the pelvis in there. So we have to find that structure first before we can place things on top of it. So coming out, right, you're going to have this curve in. Like so. And then it curves back out. Well, it comes down first and then curves back out where it's going to tuck in. And always be like kind of cross-referencing what's going on over here, so that way you don't end up making your proportions too long in a certain area or too short. So I know that if the glutes are ending here, then my glutes need to end right here on the side structure, right? Because I'm trying to keep these guys in about the same proportions. Okay, so there's my S curve, right? And so now we got to think about the front shape. So we know that the rib cage is going to come out, right? Maybe not so far as the male. And then I know that it's going to create that flat shape coming through into here, right? Into the pubic area. And then that's going to tuck in from the belly right there. So if I know my rib cage on all my other ones finished around here and here, so I know for this one, I can show the rib cage finishing right there too, right? Because you can see the rib cage from every view. And then we can bring that over here. We know our structure. This is where the stomach would tuck in then because the rib cage is there. And then this is where the belly would protrude back out. Usually create like a little of a lump structure, right? And this is where the abdomen tucks back in. And then so if I know my rib cage is here, I know my pelvis area has to be like a little bit lower, somewhere along where the belly button line is. And then this is where the legs are generated out of, right? And then you can kind of determine like if you need things to be a little wider for proportions or a little more narrow. You can come in and erase or add on top. This is why when I draw I like to use a lot of different colors, because I can see what I originally drew, what my original drawing was, and then I can draw on top of it. Cool. So then if we're going to come back in here and draw on this structure to create the breast shape, right, we have like this solid structure now, so we can kind of just put something that